So, the nature of this work is to take this, this really for me, and I think Anne Prococo's work is a great example of this. It's looking at the edges between nature and culture. And I always think of the work that these artists are doing in Project Vortex is trying to soften that edge, create a more of a soft transition between nature and culture, and doing work out of this material that's obviously harmful to nature and ourselves being part of nature, and do work that honors nature without adding to the harm that a lot of contemporary lifestyles and practices do. So, there's also this, what inspired me about Anne's work, and I've been aware of her work for a couple of decades now. This is a project that was done in 2004? Eight, thank you. So it's this is a very early kind of pioneering work. Not a lot of artists were doing large collaborations with this quantity of material and working with communities. So this is one of my favorite pieces. I'm really happy to have been able to include it. And so I want to talk a little bit more about some of this other work, because there's an interesting thing, especially between this work, which is Tyrone Tripoli, who's an artist based in Brooklyn. He comes from a very different kind of direction with this work. It's more of a formal sculptural, which is not to say that this doesn't have a beautiful formal sculptural sort of expression, but there's a certain kind of almost aggressive, tactile, sculptural, formal approach that I find very interesting. And I also find it to be compelling that he chooses not to clean the material. There's so many, in a piece of artwork, to me, what I'm looking at is the series of decisions that an artist has made. And that's what the artwork is. It's the residue of all these decisions that an artist made, and then they're willing to be vulnerable and share that with people. So I love that he's chosen not to clean this material, and he's chosen to leave evidence of the branding, and it's almost like he's pointing at the culprits. And there's also an indiscriminate kind of quality to it that I find really interesting. And then walking through the exhibit, you'll see there's a similarity between, actually, I think, Nikki Lederer's approach and Tyrone Tripoli's approach. But there's a little bit of a different, there's a little bit hands-on sculptural approach where she manipulates the material. So these are bottles that are high-density polyethylene bottles taken from the waste stream. And she cuts them by hand and then uses metal fasteners to connect them together, which, there's something different when it's a uniform object versus any object that you can find made out of plastic, and how, this has a physicality that's very human, and it feels almost like a person is in the room with you. So I was excited about including this work for a number of reasons, but I've known Nikki for over 20 years. And we're also both Canadian, which is a thing. So I was really happy when I discovered Nikki was doing this type of work. So, there's this kind of wonderful dialogue happening with Nikki's work and Tyrone's work from a very formal sculptural standpoint that I think is very interesting. I also love, I want to talk about Portia Munson. It's a huge inspiration to me. She also has a video piece that you can see in this lovely quiet alcove. It's about a whale, the contents of a whale's belly. And she has a very I don't know how to describe, it's a maximalist approach. This is small compared to a lot of her pieces, but she'll kind of sequester this material. There's a sort of a approach that really resonates with me. I think of artwork as some sort of capturing, where you capture your creative impulses and then you have this experience. And she's been capturing this material from all walks of life. She does a lot of like thrifting and finding them in different parts of the world and cataloging them, and it's all very specific and organized. So there's a fair amount of blue, which makes sense with the nature of the work having, finding its way into the waterways. If anybody has any burning questions at any point, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. So, walking through this is another Canadian artist. Initially, I selected the work. I was trying to keep it as local as possible, but there was some room to bring in some artists from a little bit further away. And this is an artist named Twyla Exner, who was supposed to be here tonight. She's a British Columbia-based artist, but unfortunately she had health issues, so had to cancel her trip. But these are all hand-woven out of telecommunication wires, which I find just so meticulous and playful and whimsical. And I think you'll see a theme, I hope you'll see a theme in this exhibition of sort of radical optimism. Like instead of, crying in a corner about various issues that we could easily do that about, these are artists who are taking that kind of problems. They're taking climate issues, petroleum, it's all petroleum products we're looking at, and trying to find ways to have hope and create the conditions for hope through their work. So these are called things, and they're very tactile. You can play with them, you can move them around. I don't know if you're welcome to do that at an exhibition, per se, but that's how they're intended to be when they exist.
If you were to live with them.
Yes. So let's see. I'll go in a little bit about Ellen's work. Ellen Driscoll is an amazing artist who used to teach at Bard. She's got a very different kind of approach to this material, and I guess that's what I find. I found compelling about all these artists is that they have very different ways of approaching it and dealing with it, managing it, and it's a material that most people have inherent bias towards. So Ellen takes these high-density polyethylene bottles, and she's been creating like narratives. So it's totally different from any of the other. Well, actually, there is some similarity between Natalia Curator and Ellen Driscoll's work, where there's this kind of very specific narrative that's being relayed. She's talking about the history of energy production, and it's this beautiful like allegory, basically, of where the U.S. gets. You can see the continents in here, and then the sort of victims of climate assault, if you will. So you see this bird she just created. I wish she was here, but she had to go to Mexico. So this piece is all about the oil and the energy, and it's interesting, and it's very meta to me because it's then made out of oil. So there's a lovely kind of poetic quality to this piece. And since I mentioned Natalia Crover's work, I think this piece here, these are 7 different pieces from her Entanglement series. And correct me if I'm wrong, Natalia's right over there. But these are all drum heads. And I fell in love with these the first time I saw them, because I was thinking about, the way she's communicating, talking in dialogue, and from the most primal way that we began communicating as humans, like banging on drums and like just very primitive, all the way through our like telecommunications system. So there's also like an interesting dialogue between her work and Twyla Exner's pieces, the woven things on the pedestals. But I love that, there's so much mystery and history in this work to me. So it really speaks to me, and also there's a meticulous quality and a very relaxed quality. It's both, and it's juxtaposed in a really balanced, beautiful way. So I love these, and I also was really excited that there was this natural light source here because of the way this piece and Ellen's piece in particular respond to natural light. It's very compelling to me. This is an artist that I just brought into the Project Vortex network, our community. She's a California-based artist, and she takes a very different approach than any of the other artists in this exhibition, in that she integrates natural found materials. So she's walking around finding little bits of driftwood and then sort of wrapping them and encapsulating them in plastic debris. So it's very delicate, and I'm sure this was a fun challenge to install. She was a little apprehensive about including it because it requires 50 T push pins in order to install it, and it's a very specific arrangement of them. But I think it came together exactly right. So,
the gene,
yeah.
all that means.
So I think, I should also mention, there's another artist from the UK that has work over there in those little containers. He's also recently joined the collective. His name is Steve McPherson. So let's walk over there and just have a quick look, because they're super intimate and fun. So these are, this artist is based in Margate in the UK, and he's been doing beach cleanups on his little strip of beach where his studio is for decades, and that's his primary source medium. So he's now, this is a more recent, over the past, I guess, 5 or 10 years, he started adding this plaster around these little objects that he finds combing the beach. And they become like mysterious toys, and really like just formal studies. So there is definitely like a relationship, just approaching it as a sculptor without any sense of hierarchy of materials. Thinking about the craft having the value as opposed to the inherent value based on scarcity. So that's this is his work, and when I asked him if we could include any, he was like, "You can include all of them." And I was like, "Really?" And then I sort of apprehensively let Amy Griffin, the director, know that hopefully it wasn't going to be too difficult to install them all. But they did a really beautiful job. Created these different size pedestals to install them at, and I hope you love them as much as I do. This is also a similar approach that he's taken, and these are almost like Kandinsky paintings, is how I think of them. It's the same process. It's this her percolite plaster with little bits of debris that he's picked up from the beach. Aren't they lovely? And then I guess one other thing I really wanted to point out, I didn't get into Pamela's work, but I don't know if I need to tell you everything about everyone's work. You could just experience it. I'll be here if you have questions. But this one, to me, was also incredibly interesting because from a feminine perspective, I think a lot about the fact that the vast majority of plastic pollution kind of originated as a vessel, and so it's like we're taking these vessels, we're using them briefly, and then we're throwing them out as a society. It's like a cultural norm that has become so prevalent. And a lot of the artists typically that are working in this way are women. So you see a lot more female engagement in it, and maybe because it's sort of an assault on the feminine divine, in a way. Because of all the aspects to the plastic pollution problem. They're affecting our reproductive systems, our endocrine systems, our hormones, all these, a vast array of health problems associated with it. And still in 2026, we're somewhere around 10%, 9% is actually getting recycled. So there's so much misinformation about this material and subterfuge. But what I love is the humility and the self-reflectiveness of this piece. This was actually one of his childhood toys. Like he's and that degree of accountability to me is just so, it speaks to the evolution of mankind, and how to be kinder as men. So I really love that piece. Maybe I can have it someday. Anyway, yeah, do people have questions, or would you like me to keep talking about other artworks?
Yeah, we can talk about this piece. And
Yes,
I got one.
I'll be happy to. So this is an artist who's based in Maine, and she goes by Posey, or Pamela Moulton is her name. But these are some of her smaller pieces, and she'll use all like repurposed fishing rope and shells and found beads and like all kinds of little bits of ephemera. But these are small. These are her cameos. She features pink a lot in her work. But these are sort of smaller pieces compared to her typical work, which is massive in scale. And you can see some of, there's one photograph of one of her larger collaborative pieces around the corner. And it's intended to be very collaborative, engaging, there's a nice design on. It's intended to give you a tactile experience of interacting with the material and try to almost create a culture of creative stewardship is sort of the nature of her work. She's really doing a ton of collaboration and shifting that sort of perception that people have about material and what can be done with it. Yeah. Anyone have questions or concerns? Or
Could you talk about your work?
Oh, sure. So I did include a few pieces of mine. I have 3 pieces over here, and then one over there. So this piece is something I'm incredibly excited about. It's hot off the press. This is a 3D printed sculpture that is 3D printed out of post-industrial medical grade plastic. So it's all from the medical industry, which is why it's so clean. And it's encapsulating a small amount of my massive collection of yellow bottle caps from working with this material for about 23 years now. I've amassed quite a collection of them, and so for quite a while I've envisioned creating these sculptures to encapsulate them so that they're essentially transformed into something enjoyable to look at instead of a problem. So I've tried to figure out how to exhibit them a number of times before this encapsulating process and never really been happy with it. So this I'm very happy with. And I'm planning to do a lot more of those. And then these are what I consider to be oil paintings. Since oil product. Yes, exactly. The main ingredient being oil. So these are a couple of wall-based things. I've done a series of these, and I'm really enjoying it. This has actually, I kind of get geeky on techniques. So this has, you can see like little dots, and those are ultrasonic welds. And then you could see what would look like in metal, like a bead, and that's an injection welder. So I'm applying a lot of techniques that you would use for metal welding to plastics, which are typically only used in the virgin plastics industry. So this is a piece called Buy Now, Pay Later. Yeah.